Well, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you not just to the last article on Chris and society. Well, don't we all live in a society though, but, well, it's definitely one that I feel like, well, it'll probably be the most divisive out of all the articles because this one concerns Chris and politics. And, well, the origins for Chris's political basis and the sort of the image he casts, it's not particularly unlike the one he casts out for religion. He claims to be this, that, and the other, but does absolutely nothing to demonstrate. On the contrary, he demonstrates to be the complete opposite. And you guys may have already caught on to sort of, well, my unpopular opinions about what I think about people who do that. It's the same thing when it comes to politics, and, well, you guys are going to see I think you could also judge a lot by a person by what they don't say, but then again, Chris, I think, says quite enough for us to get an impression. But with that being said, Eid permit, Eid, Chris's biting political commentary on President Trump. Ironically, 9 years later, it's not necessarily the sort of thing that, well, to be honest, Chris has kind of toned down his anger towards current President Donald Trump, but we'll see by the end of the year, shall we? Since his discovery on the internet through 2017, Chris has been quite vocal about his political views. He was once a moderate and then leaned left. Following his shift in gender identity from 2011 onwards, he moved further left. His progressing support of the LGBT plus community may have been why he became more vocal about politics. General views. Before the 2010s, Chris was a self-described moderate. His views were eclectic. They could be best described as fiscal, liberal, and socially conservative. He would therefore receive criticism from both sides of the political fence. Liberal trolls criticized Chris for his racism, sexism, homophobia, and black and white view of the world, as well as his poor understanding of science. Conservative trolls criticized him for his lack of a job, reliance on the government, unusual behavior, and obscure interests. After the close of the classic era, Chris's social views started to shift leftwards, while his fiscal views shifted even further. The reasons for Chris's political shift. A shift in identity. Chris's transgender identity has left him open to political influence from others, particularly as he has begun socializing with the LGBT community and other generally progressive outlets. He even became accepting of gay men, a group he once vehemently opposed. Financial problems. Chris's deteriorating financial situation, continued dependence on government money, and growing health problems for himself and his mother have enhanced his sensitivity to social spending and fiscal policy. In particular, one of Permert's most prominent policy goals was the repeal of the current Affordable Care Act. While the exact effects of the law on healthcare costs and availability for common people are debatable, it is generally considered at least partly effective. Chris has no doubt heard about Republican repeal efforts from his limited political news exposure, and likely holds them against Trump and his allies. Politics in the Trump era and beyond. Chris voiced criticism of Republican Party presidential nominee Donald Trump throughout 2016, or at least by the time Chris decided to become slightly interested in the upcoming election. After Trump's surprise victory, he issued outright death threats against President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence after they were inaugurated, which I know they'll probably get to talk about in a second, but wishing death upon a presidential-elect is one of the things that is not repealed by in the United States Constitution, and you can face pretty serious jail time for doing stuff like that. Anyway, he viewed himself as part of the anti-Trump resistance, although he did little aside from post memes and additional messages telling them to die. Chris's interests in LGBT plus issues likely played a role in his attacks on then new administration. However, in 2018, under the influence of the idea guys, He talked in a video about opposing Nazis and claimed to be a member of Antifa. He also destroyed a toy pony under the impression that Nazis, a recurring antagonistic presence in the Idea Guy's lore, had bugged it. As Chris became more enthralled by the concept of the dimensional merge, he generally tuned out of politics as he became more focused on alternative dimensions and his role in ensuring that cartoons and video games could become real. Chris would eventually voice support to Joe Biden's presidential campaign, but he voted for Lisa Simpson in 2020 because he actually believes that she will become President of the United States after the dimensional merge takes place. You know, I understand that apparently in Australia you can face a fine if you don't vote in an election, whether it was local or otherwise. Maybe they're more lenient towards local elections, perhaps. But then again, it's sort of one of those things where you can look at it one of two ways. One, Australia is still a democracy where anybody can have the right to vote, but everybody can also have the right to not vote. And I think the idea that you could face a consequence for not doing it kind of seems a little bit, well, you know what I'm trying to say? I'm not particularly the idea of, well, if you don't do it, you're going to face a fine. But, well, then again, unless, of course, it's written in law in Australia, then that might be slightly different. But then again, I'm sure that there's been campaigns in South Korea to try to overturn the idea of national service for a year, and I'm more than certain there's been some sort of outcry in Australia to overturn this obligation, if you will. In fact, I wouldn't even so go far as say it's an obligation because, well, suppose you vote for somebody and they didn't win, well, you told them to do it anyway, so what's the point in doing it if you don't get what you want out of the matter? But then again, Australia's politics must be, well, quite different to either the UK's or the Americans. But speaking of the Americans, I'm not entirely sure whether or not you can face any sort of repercussion for voting for somebody who is not actually a designated vote in a presidential campaign. Why, Chris? But then again, maybe Chris was just lying about voting for Lisa Simpson and instead just straight up put an X for Joe Biden. I say that because we have no real proof that Chris voted for Lisa Simpson beyond saying she did, but that doesn't mean to say, when she actually got to the booth, unless there literally was a box for Lisa Simpson, then, well, how do we... It's, you know what I mean? It's one of those things, well, how are we supposed to know that? Anyway, but again, if whatever consequences you could face at doing that, I have no idea. Apart from the idea that, well, what a waste of a vote then if Chris was legitimately serious. While he continued to hate Trump and Pence, the outcome of the election didn't matter to him as much personally due to his belief in the delusion. His belief that Lisa is president presumably takes its influence from the Simpsons episode Bart to the Future, which is set years in the future after she succeeds Donald Trump's then fictional administration, which substantially increased the national debt before she took office. And of course, I know what you're also probably thinking. Out of all the Simpsons future episodes Chris decided to take influence by, Chris had to pick the worst one. Yeah, I don't want to turn this into a confusing debate about the best future episodes of The Simpsons. But to be honest, the critique for a lot of those is quite high. Future drama's quite good. Lisa's Wedding is probably the best. I think, was it called Ghosts of Christmas Future? Apparently I heard is one of the best ones they've done in years. In general, I think those are some of the best episodes that The Simpsons does. And bear in mind, guys, Lisa's Wedding, which I think was made all the way back in 1997, showed the archaic and dazzling future of 2010. That's just funny to me for some reason. However, the events of Bart to the Future are not predictive, despite numerous viral videos promoting such misconception. Donald Trump considered running for the job in 1999, 1 year before the episode aired, and the first of 6 bankruptcies to affect his business, which the national debt joke referenced, occurred in 1991. Yeah, I hadn't thought about mentioning this until now, but if I ever decide to do a comprehensive history series completely of my own volition, I probably would actually do maybe one about Donald Trump, because it would sort of encompass a lot of his the history of his businesses, his bankruptcies, especially, well, the 1980s was not particularly a kind decade to Donald, and all the way up until the present day. But because there is, well, so much to talk about, you may as well start at the beginning. Yeah, ironically, in this day and age, Donald Trump, as conflicting as he is, and this was the case all the way back in 2017 when he got inaugurated, there was not a single day where I didn't hear a newspaper talk about him, because, well, I think it's just because apparently there was even some rumor knocking about that he apparently wants to run for a 3rd term, which means he would have to sort of do some sort of introduce some sort of bill into the Constitution about whether a president can run for a 3rd term. Even though if Donald Trump was to do that, he would be in his early 80s by the time, well, election time runs around again. And bear in mind, this is also dependent on, one, Donald Trump actually, well, if Donald Trump can actually do it. Second, if people actually are willing to vote for Donald Trump for a 3rd term. Oh, unless, of course, somebody from the Republican Party who is actually fit to surpass Donald Trump, or the Democrats actually come back swinging quite hard. Though, with that being said, if you do really want to come back swinging hard, then, you know what, maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to have the idea of Donald Trump possibly run for a 3rd term, because if the Democrats can actually knock out Donald Trump, even after all the work he's gone to actually try and make it a legal case to run for a 3rd term as presidency, then you're gonna have to. That would be pretty special. But we'll have to wait to see about that. Do I think that maybe if Kamala Harris decided to run again, I'm not entirely sure, because, well, I think Kamala Harris was kind of up the creek well before they decided the idea that she was going to surpass Biden. Well, replace Biden, I should say. But, yeah. I think Kamala Harris is what I think in the political would call a commercial flop. Somebody who was told you're going to be running for president before she even finished any sort of policy or any sort of structured debate. It's, yeah, like I said, on sale before it was finished. Anyway, sorry about all of that, by the way. Well, what can you do? Views on policy. Chris's political views resemble a 3rd grade child if I were president social studies assignment, possessing a shallow understanding of major world issues. A rather insightful example of his limited understanding of how the world actually works is his video A Public Announcement for Congress, in which Chris explains in detail the actions he would take if elected president of the United States. One doesn't even need to play the video, but we will, that Chris is completely full of shit. As the title, A Public Announcement for Congress, contradicts itself. The video is not directed at Congress in any way, but rather is a stump speech directed at the American people. Anyone familiar with Chris's unique manner of speaking knows that he makes a habit of using fancy-sounding words, to him at least, to make himself sound more intelligent than he actually is. Since Chris has no idea how to actually use these words, the results of this make him sound even more like a moron. And you know what? Like I said, let's watch it anyway, because honestly, I don't know, it may be kind of funny. And also, I usually, sometimes I do refrain from like putting on these videos and stuff like that, but considering that, well, let's have a little bit of fun with this. And the first thing, and I know probably the first thing you're going to be saying to this is that, do you think it could have helped Chris if he picked maybe a slightly different location to do this? Maybe something that didn't show a background completely full of clutter. Although, with that being said, the corner of this room actually looks a little bit more well presented than before. So maybe I'll give Chris credit for that. Although you can still see Marge Simpson in lingerie in the corner here. And I'm pretty sure his, like, was this poster of Kratos possibly up there from God of War 2? But let's listen to I'm the government, I'm the government, I'm the reason nothing works.
Good evening, friends. As your presidential candidate, I will now state how I feel what we can do to improve these nations, these states. For one thing, we got so many poor people out on the streets. I mean, we have soup kitchens, and we have.
He's not. He's not exactly Kennedy or he's not exactly giving Kennedy or Truman a run for his money, is he? In fact, to be honest, Truman would have been what American president was actually, was there ever an American president from the state of Virginia? Just to ask you guys, because I know that Truman was more from Missouri, which I suppose is slightly closer to Virginia. I'm pretty sure there's got to be like better examples, and unless of course you want to go as far back as like say Johnson, Garfield, or Ulysses S. Grant, but that might be from this time anyway, or at least once we have records to them giving speeches. I mean, to be fair as well. You could argue Chris is slightly a little bit more. No, Roosevelt was way more fluid, I suppose, in his approach. Which, give credit to Roosevelt. That's quite a compliment because of Roosevelt's historical series of medical problems.
Soup beds. We should really combine the two into soup hotels. So then there would be a bed for every homeless person until they can get back up on their own feet. Also, lower taxes. I will propose lower taxes, and we shall not have to pay so much. 5% is okay, but why not 2.5%?
Yeah, okay, by the way, I must also point out is that, well, just slash tax income by half, so you go from 5% to 2.5. That's mon deux Trieste. I mean, with an economic strategy that's watertight and foolproof, who needs a bloody recession? It's a good thing Chris didn't make this during 2025, because anybody who's familiar with this ongoing trade war between the Americans and the Canadians, Americans and the Mexicans, Americans and the Chinese, well, it's probably a good thing that Chris doesn't really talk about politics anymore anyway, not even on Blue Sky. But this is kind of funny, I suppose. Funny? Yeah, I suppose so.
And we will not cut off any benefits for the old people. They are good. And we shall give them plenty of money so they can afford their medications and services to keep them alive. Because we do not pay for when we are sick, we pay for our good health. And we only pay after we're in good health. We pay to stay alive. We do not pay to die. And speaking of which...
can't help but feel that that whole "we do not pay to die" must have been from some sort of advertisement he saw on the television somewhere, because that does not sound like the sort of thing that a congressman or a statesman or any presidential elect would try to say. That's nuts.
Too much violence goes on within these city streets. I will propose only gun distribution to the official authority, which shall be within the police department, nowhere else. And all guns.
Right. Yeah. So far, if we can deduce exactly what happens, is that in Chris's views, is that the homeless will have all the accommodation and all their otherwise sanitary requirements otherwise cared for. And that the elderly will be otherwise cared for, and they will be surpassed with a excessive a pension scheme, it would seem. And also, Chris is talking about, well, how can I best put this? Is that turning the idea of the United States into one gigantic police state? I say that because when the police have all the firearms and have all the authority to administer them at will, well, okay, Chris doesn't quite say that, but then again, how are you going to monitor, or how are you going to monetize the thought of, well, hundreds of thousands of police officers in the United States only being legally allowed to hold guns? How well do you think that's going to go, Chris? And who's going to say that? Some may remember a few years ago when that Japanese prime minister was assassinated because somebody constructed a handmade automatic weapon. Yeah, Chris, are you absolutely you can't be telling me this is a good idea? Because, well, again, what if people really do, like, blacksmiths and, well, those who literally just recycle weaponry at their own will? I'm bringing all of this up because, well, to be honest, I know this video was make-believe and that this was something that Chris just did because Jackie told him to do it. Here's bear this in mind. When Chris made this video, as of now, he's 20. He was 28 when he made this. I'm 27. So in contrast, we're not particularly that different in age. But if I was going to be completely serious about this, I would have just looked into this, found something that I can agree to, because if nothing else, make it sound a little bit more realistic. Bring yourself back down to reality about this, because Chris may have all the best intentions, but then again, something that was a bit of a common theme throughout all of the videos that Chris did for Jackie is that Chris was exceptionally low effort in a lot of these, and Chris just throwing things out there just because they sound like a good idea. In fact, to be honest, the one real stand Chris actually took in the world of politics, want to know what it is? It's this poster right here of Sonichu and Rosechew trying to save McIntyre Park. At least Chris actually went to a rally to talk about it. So that's something.
All my local community people shall be taken away. At least the bullets. When the bullets are necessary, or when there is an outbreak of violence from another nation or planet, then we shall issue the bullets. At free stations to be open immediately.
So you're telling me you would only use you would take away the bullets? I don't really know how Chris is going to, again, how does Chris imagine any of that's going to work? Where is the budget for these sorts of things? And, well, this in many ways this probably sounds like a worse idea than the concept of the judges in the 2000 AD comics, because at least the judges act as judge, jury, and executioner. Chris is, well, only going to be hoarding bullets as a means of defense from alien nations. But why would I don't understand Chris's logic. I really don't. I mean, because I'm taking Chris was never going to run for office for national defense. You couldn't tell me if there was anything Chris was going to do about that. And I clicked off the video. Right, okay, 1 second. There we go.
Otherwise, we'll send in our special troops, our special force. And also, we will be okay to have the gays within our community. In all states, there will be gay marriage ability for every state within the United Nations. I mean, keep it to yourselves in your room. Just don't force it upon everybody, because what may be right for you may not be right for most, for some. You take the good from the bad, and then you get an opening statement like mine.
I think there was a point to what Chris just said, and yes, but you remember when I was talking about Roosevelt? Well, here's an interesting thing about Roosevelt, is that frequently he had to actually have his wife actually get him through a lot of his speeches, because his crippling polio was... And again, one thing out to Roosevelt, even though he got through the US pretty much the entirety of the Second World War, minus like the last 5 months, he had to do make some pretty sporadic and some pretty on the book, because remember, Roosevelt was very heavily against the idea of joining the Allies for World War II, but they kind of had to acquiesce. Well, and it wasn't just because Pearl Harbor happened, but it was also because, well, if you take one look to the east, and you saw exactly how dire the situation was, because Nazi Germany had now pretty much encompassed almost all of mainland Europe outside of Russia, or the Soviet Union, if you will. But then, of course, there was the growing concern about the Japanese's expanding empire as well, from the colonization of Manchuria to the invasion of China. Now, if 6 months ago, I watched the entirety of The World at War, narrated by Laurence Olivier, it's probably the finest documentary series ever made, and Chris could have learned a lot more by just watching one episode of that than anything we've heard so far. But let's continue.
People need to appreciate life, so we will not have to face death. I lost my train of thought there, but that's okay. I am only human. We are all human. I am a noble, honest person. No matter what everybody else may say, even on the internet, and my opponent, Senor Cache de Clyde.
Well, if there's one thing I can agree with Chris on right now, at least that's the one thing I suppose he has technically got right about the idea of politicians, is that they are full of shit sometimes, especially when true and honest. Right, okay, Chris, yeah, sure you are. I can honestly say that, well, this is absolutely on brand with your level of oration and your broadcasting ability.
He tells lies about me. And so do the trolls that have patrolled me over the internet. Their cheers and non-cheers do not go appreciated. Because it is not everybody who can take a joke, even when it's at their own expense. And with that, I will propose internet securities reinforced by the FBI, and there will be patrol stations of the troll busters around these United States. Any troll activity that you may be suspicious of an individual, you report to your local authority, and they will inform the local FBI station within that state, and then they will investigate thoroughly over the wireless that is called the internet, and they will trace the emails back to the origin home address or location, and they will be apprehended and fined or sentenced depending on how cruel they are to the victim. I stand strong. I stand firm. I am a noble leader.
So far, okay, so just to round this up, Chris's entire basis for proposal for the United States is something as a bizarre combination between 1984, The Man in the High Castle, and and Mayor of Quickville, if we're being honest, because let's face it, at least the world of Quickville is a sort of dystopian, horror-filled landscape where nobody is free, and Chris would have been happier if the Axis powers had actually won and that half of California was taken over by the Japanese somehow. I don't know.
And if I am elected, I will do my best to keep our America strong and sound and not go down the drain. I'm sorry, Obama. I did vote for you, but I gotta agree with my father. You're bringing some of the situations downhill. But I have nothing against you because I did vote for you, and I liked your documentary on A&E. I would shake your hand at the first opportunity I would to meet you, Mr. President. And therefore, I shall conclude my opening statements in the candidacy of the President by saying, I will do my best, and I am not lazy. Thank you. This ad is not real. I'm not being...
I love the fact that Chris actually had to clarify, I am not lazy, because, if there's one thing that any politician should actually be able to achieve, is stating the absolute obvious. But, yes, in the video, Chris displays to the world that he has no idea how anything works. I think we also explained that, because apparently Chris's first 100 days as president would be as follows. Use federal funds to create massive government housing complexes in every major city for the homeless, drastically lower the sales tax of the state of Virginia from 5% to 2.5%, not lower benefits for retirees, subsidize pharmaceutical costs for retirees, confiscate all firearms owned by civilians, legalize gay marriage in every member state of the United Nations, not United States of America, and construct FBI stations to monitor the activities of internet trolls. Ideologically, Chris's views are all over the place, ranging from conservative, e.g. slashing tax rates in half, to extremely liberal views, e.g. setting up massive welfare initiative in the form of soup hotels. Notably, the 5% tax rate Chris wants to be halved refers to the Virginia sales tax rate, and not a federal income tax. Besides the fact that sales tax are set by the states and not by the federal government, and President Chandler would have no power to change this. Chris's misunderstanding of the distinction between income and sales tax points to that fact. To nobody's surprise, Bob probably filed all of Chris's taxes for him during those 3 incredible months when Chris was actually employed. Since Chris was most likely never seen a W-2 in his entire life, his approval of cutting taxes are most likely the influence of his late father. This is also most certainly the case with the next 2 points, which both relate to benefits for retired persons. He would also take away all firearms from civilian populations, a direct violation of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. He then immediately backtracks on this idea, instead settling to just confiscate and ban the sale of ammunition. This ammunition would be redistributed to the population in the event of an attack from another nation or planet. Not even considering the fact that such a plan would be a logistical nightmare. Yes, exactly. Recruiting raw, completely untrained civilians in the name of international defense is not a good idea. Like, at all. Chris seems to forget that the United States already has a military to defend itself. So exactly why Chris believes the US population would have to be engaged in a guerrilla-style warfare against a foreign invader is a mystery. Chris's final proposal is perhaps the most egregious, suggesting that the resources of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a federal agency which is, among other things, dedicated to stopping foreign and domestic terrorist plots, should be used to investigate people who type "you're gay" over the internet. In short, Chris's views on politics at the time were mostly the product of the influences of his conservative parents, combined with a well-meaning yet naive understanding of complex sociopathical issues and sociopolitical issues, if we're on top of that, like poverty and gun violence. Other issues. Terrorism. On the 15th of November 2015, Chris wrote a piece on the ISIS attacks in France. He demonstrated a very simplistic notion of ISIS, comparing it to a cartoon villain. Oh yeah, because absolutely if there was one thing that ISIS were absolutely doing is that they were comparable to the likes of Dr. Robotnik. Yeah, of course, that is entirely what ISIS they got a tip saying that Sonic the Hedgehog was found in France. That's why they, hijacked an entire rock concert and murdered more than 15 people, looking to gather energies and power for themselves. Well, that's also, again, the history about the attacks in France, because France had a very, very they had a very, very specific message towards Islamic State, and well, they kind of put a bit of a target on themselves for doing it. Not that I don't blame the French for it, because well, you have to show you're not going to back down from terror. However, that is sort of, it was a consequence of that action was, well, he also tried to understand the motives of the terrorists by using his own life experiences against trolls. Oh my god, he didn't do that. Saying, "I feel the terrorists, regardless of country, are misguided with paranoia and fear of others." Well, Chris might have been onto something, but unfortunately, well, okay, again, Chris might have been onto something a little bit with this. However, does Chris need to understand why terrorists want to go through with the things they do? First of all, you have to wonder why on earth they want to volunteer for this in the first place, because I don't know if any of you guys have ever noticed this before, but terrorists, the eventuality that they will die for what they do is kind of indicative to a huge part of all of this. And well, why on earth would you want to go through with it if it means dying at the very end? For what exactly? But again, I don't have all the time in the world to try and to discuss the minefield, if you will, as to why people do this, because it's a long one and it's not necessarily. Let's just say Chris might have been onto something. How about we just leave it at that? His solution for world peace is simply to stand together, combining our hearts and souls in the efforts to share the lights of friendship and love. This ignores all underlying motives of socio-political tensions and is a solution for fighting for a fight among small children. Patriotism. In the 2009 Father Call, Matthew called out Chris for his lack of patriotism, for making twin falling towers, saying, "Don't tell me you're an American." Chris took it literally, responding with, "I was born in America, I was raised in America my whole life, I never left the United States of America." On the 3rd of May 2017, Chris naively appealed to North Korea, a foreign totalitarian regime, for a coup against the President of the United States. Fantastic, Chris. What a stupid. That's pretty stupid even by your standards, Chris. Again, if Chris waited until 2025, because currently if North Korea is a foreign totalitarian regime, South Korea is also a is still under martial law as far as we're concerned. So maybe Chris could have appealed to the whole peninsula, if you will. Can you say peninsula? Nah, Korea's not a peninsula. But you could have applied to the whole of Korea, North and South, because for those who are at all interested, you may be surprised to learn is that if people in North Korea somehow manage, and I really do mean somehow, manage to actually jump the border and actually get into South Korea, then they are, by law, completely accepted by the South Koreans, because as far as South Korea is concerned, the whole of Korea, if you will, is under sort of one, like basically under one nation. So people from North Korea who are more than happy, and don't get me wrong, guys, there are plenty of people at this moment who are secretly planning to actually get the hell out of North Korea, because let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, in North Korea, they are not if you ever go to prison in North Korea, it can affect the next 3 generations of your family. And this is included but not limited to babies no more than 2 months old could be sent to prison in North Korea, just because they are because of a little thing called discrimination by association. That sort of thing would have stuff like that would have started a nationwide riot in the UK or in the United States, but in North Korea, it's just a thing that happens, apparently. At that point, it wouldn't surprise me if North Korea wasn't exactly against the idea of, well, arresting somebody at the point of conception, i.e., once you are conceived, you are considered a prisoner in the eyes of the North Koreans, and maybe maybe abortion isn't exactly out of the reference for, you know, the North Korean government, because let's be completely honest, guys, if you really are that petty and you really are imposing an idea that you arrest babies, then, well, who's to say, well, the North Koreans are not morally above the idea of, well, committing abortions. I know, now listen, again, it's one of those things you may not hear too much, but to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised in about 10 years' time there will be a lot of very dark secrets that come out of North Korea, because anyone who can see the way that, because people will go to work out before, sooner or later, that, well, what benefit is there to live in North Korea? Like, what's the attraction to living in North Korea? I'm saying that as though North Korea is some sort of destination hotspot where people will want to migrate and become a citizen of North Korea for the rest of their lives. I'm talking about it as though it's not exactly the sort of thing that's going to be featured on Away in the Sun or anything like that. But yeah, I can't see that. Well, it's going to be one of those things that's going to last much longer because, well, who in their right mind would actually want to migrate to North Korea? Because, well, if the North Koreans don't even like their own citizens that much, then who is going to say they like anybody 10 miles outside the border, or even 1,000 miles for that matter? Anyway, moving on. Chris's involvement in the political process. Chris, to many people's shock and horror, has voted in multiple United States presidential elections. In the year 2000, when Chris was 18 years old, he voted for Bush, and look at that. The only one that didn't vote for Bush was not in the popular vote. The Electoral College, the state of Virginia, Greene County. In 2004, Chris also voted for... I mean, let's be completely honest. The only reason why Bush even won in 2004 is because, well, because George Bush mentioned 9/11 over and pretty much at any opportunity he could, whilst John Kerry couldn't really do that. Meanwhile, 2008, you can see Chris did a bit of a 180 and voted for Obama, even though McCain was won over in Greene County. Which, again, I know fine well a lot about, because John McCain was the guy who was captured in Vietnam and passed away a few years ago, but, oh well. No doubt he was probably the best one they had, because obviously Bush wasn't a contender again. Less can be said about Mitt Romney, however, because look at that. Only won out in Greene County, and Barack Obama, even though this was the point in which his popularity was starting to decline, he was still vastly more popular than Romney. And let's be honest about that. There was no question about that. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton, a little bit less so, because Donald Trump won out in the Greene County and the electoral vote. Because I'm pretty sure Virginia is also quite... It's quite a big state in terms of, well, having the electoral college vote. Meanwhile, oh, right, okay, so Chris really did vote for Lisa Simpson then. Fantastic. And Greene County is sort of almost a pretty safe Republican state county vote, it would seem, because they went for Donald Trump, they went for Mitt Romney, they went for John McCain, and they went for Bush. But as we can see here, well, won out. And then, of course... But then again, Chris must have saw the error of his ways somehow, because apparently he did vote for Kamala Harris last year. And even won... the state of Virginia won out. But, well... Yeah. Oh, well. Pre-2000. Prior to 2000, Chris was not eligible to vote because he was below the age of 18. Which would have been the minimum voting age since 1971. 1971, so that was when, Nixon was trying to, was that about the time of Nixon trying to, run for his second term? Well, good luck trying to tell me how well that worked out, because, Watergate and stuff like that. Actually, can I just state for the record right now, I legitimately do not know what Watergate is. I know... It essentially completely ruined Nixon's political career, but I have absolutely no idea what it involved. And the only evidence I have of it is that, well, that one episode of Futurama where Nixon apparently had Bender's body from the neck downwards. Does Bender have a neck? Is that in any way satirizing what happened in Watergate, or was that just something they came up with? I don't know. I really don't know. Anyway, 2000 to 2004. The United States presidential election of the year 2000 marked the first election in which Chris could vote. Chris has never explicitly stated who he voted for in 2000 or 2004. However, he has excluded Bush from his list of jerks as being one of the few good men. I see. And in Mailbag 28, wrote that he liked Bush because he made some good decisions. Oh dear. It is therefore likely that Chris voted for Bush. 2008. In 2008, Chris voted for Democratic candidate Barack Obama. His main reason for doing so was the fact that he had watched a set of documentaries on both Obama and his Republican opponent John McCain. Chris, in true and honest form, said he voted against McCain because he couldn't identify with him on a personal level. Now that's surprising, actually. In December of 2008, he stated, "I saw more of myself in Obama when I watched his A&E biography than in McCain's A&E biography. Both downloaded from the PlayStation Store." Who would vote for a war hero that you couldn't feel much for, or the guy you feel like is similar to you in social dilemmas? What? Chris's reasons for choosing Obama over McCain are understandable, given the number of candidates, successful or otherwise, who has campaigned as a man of the people. However, exactly what qualities of Barack Obama, an obese man-child, saw in himself is currently unknown. Chris elaborated further in 2014 during a date with Catherine. "I kind of felt like, with my mental problems and whatnot, I felt like I could similarly relate to him. If I felt more relatable to him in that sense that McCain was, as he was the prisoner in that other country, he insisted he did not want to be released early. He wanted to go out with us at the same time as everybody else. Sorry, everybody else. I mean, that is admirable." He pronounces this word or. I think, you know what I think the problem is? I think Chris has no idea what he's talking about, and I don't think Chris really understands the implications of what exactly McCain was wanting to do. 2009. In 2009, Chris made the following comments on the 2009 Virginia gubernatorial election. "Also, as for my voting in the current events, my main concern is the governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell or Craig Deeds. There are tales of McDonnell wanting to take Virginia backwards, in a sense, by supporting a law created by Bush Jr., I think, and McDonnell is against abortion rights, and he would make it illegal, even in incest or rape, and for married couples to have the choice. On the other hand, Craig supports higher taxes for gas, housing and such. Currently Craig is ahead, but my father and I are both feel that neither McDonnell or Craig are good. They're both poor choices. We're even thinking on election day to write in Snoopy, Charlie Brown's dog, instead of voting for McDonnell or Craig. Lol." I mean, to be fair to Chris, I'm pretty sure there would have been a lot more things going into this than the sales of tax or, things about abortion. However, yeah, if those are the things that really stand out to you, either Chris didn't hear anything else or, well, those were the things that maybe everybody kept bringing it back to. I feel that higher taxes, it's the kind of for the same reason why Bush Jr. has always been regarded as sort of the war president, because so much of his time in office was occupied with the Middle East. And I feel that higher taxes is the better of the two evils in the governor issues, so I'll probably root for Deeds anyway. Bob McDonnell ended up winning the race with a 59% of the vote. This is the only time Chris is known to have paid attention to a statewide election. There were exactly 2 write-in votes in Ruckersville during this election, which makes it seem quite possible that Chris and Bob did in fact write in Snoopy. 2012. Chris would go on to vote for Obama a second time in 2012, for, once again, no real reason besides his claim that he personally identified with him, saying, "I felt like I wanted to make sure that I had a good reason to decide for the change, and having a first black president. Aside from that, cause if I had done that, I would have done it just on that alone. That would have been racist." I am going to read that again because, hang on, I felt like I wanted to make sure that I had a good reason to decide from the change and having a first black president. Aside from that, because if I had done that, if I had done it on just that alone, that would have been racist. So, hang on a second. So, Chris, the only reason you voted for Obama is because if you voted for McCain, people would have called you racist because you didn't want to see a black man become United States president. Chris, you do realize that if you're good, Chris, in fact, I'm going to say this to you guys as well. If you're going to, you shouldn't really be concerned about what other people are going to think about you, because in many cases, if you're going to be voting for somebody, you should be voting them for the reasons that you are going to stand by, not because of, well, perception. Because here's the honest thing, and I'm gonna I've talked a lot about the United States throughout this, but I'm also going to bring it back to you about the things that happen in the UK as well, because I feel they're somewhat relevant. So, currently, a very large teaching union in the United Kingdom has written a full-blown article basically decimating the UK Reform Party, led by a man called Nigel Farage. Some Americans may be quite familiar with the name Nigel Farage because Nigel Farage has made a lot of very bold appearances to try to get close to Donald Trump. Now, Reform in the United Kingdom is a right-wing political party. It's probably not a very far right. We're not talking about the National Socialists or anything like that. However, the union basically said that Reform is fundamentally a racist organization. Now, I'm just going to put this out there. This was written only about on the 16th of April, so it's only about a few days old. With that being said, nobody from the Reform Party, nobody at all, has ever come forward to state, on the contrary, that they were wrong. There's never been an issue of a dispute about these claims or allegations. There's never once been any sort of because listen, here's how I would have put it. If I was a member of the Reform Party, if I was a politician for Reform, and I heard that I was fundamentally, racist and anything like that, I would have gotten a solicitor involved immediately. I would have taken out a lawsuit against the union for decimation and stuff like that. I would have told them categorically that I was not like that, and that I would demand them to repeal their assessment immediately. It's the fact that they haven't done that, and the fact that this is still lying on, would leave me to the impression that, well, if somebody had said something about me that was fundamentally wrong but had very, very serious implications, I would take this absolutely to court, to the law. I would absolutely nail this the very first second somebody said things about me that were not only completely untrue and unfounded, but had very, very serious life-changing consequences. I say that because, I'm just going to share this very quickly with you guys. That has happened to me before. Somebody, and I'm not going to say who, has made very, very serious allegations against me before. You know what I did? I reported this. I made a full-on report. Only a few minutes later, I went to the police about it. They told me that they would not be taking any further action and that they would not be looking any further into this because not only did they read my statement, but the police also informed me that if this should ever happen again, you get onto them immediately and you settle this the very first instant this happens again. Because and I'm not kidding, guys, they were very, very serious. And I did absolutely everything that I knew the right thing was to do. But I'm just putting this out there, guys, is that whatever you do, you've got to actually have a reason for doing it. And something that just goes far beyond the idea of people will think differently for you. Because, well, why exactly? Just to bring it back to Chris for 1 second, is that, well, unfortunately for you, Chris, people already thought you were racist, no matter what, because of the things you said and for the things you wrote about. Bear in mind, Chris was the exact same person who claimed, among many other things, that he didn't want to date a black woman because he prophesied in his dreams that his daughter would be white, so therefore he couldn't date a black woman. But Chris just wants. But apparently the fact that Chris actually had to outline that, and then also say that if I only voted, then that would have been seen as racist. 2016. Moving on. Despite having 4 more years of opportunities to actually understand how a country functions, Chris's reasoning for his choice in the 2016 presidential election remained laughably shallow. Chris repeatedly made clear for his preference for Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton during this election cycle, his main reason being that she is a woman. In February of 2016, Chris said, "I feel like American needs a woman's touch finally after all these years." Whatever the fuck that means. As a reason for why he wanted Hillary Clinton to become president. Chris did make a slight attempt to develop his political views from the Obama era. Instead of just voting for Clinton because she reminds him of himself, he read up on the issues. Unfortunately, this consisted of skimming clickbait articles written by LGBT activists. He also cited an episode of The Simpsons as one of his major sources for being opposed to Clinton's opponent, Donald Trump. When a fan asked him for reasons to vote for Clinton, he responded, "Hillary will tax the fat cats and fill the middle class and lower and get the country less in debt. She is pro-LGBTQ and immigrants. She is more beneficial for everyone in general, and this country is long overdue for a woman's touch." Despite claiming to be a feminist, the sexism in Chris's woman's touch remarks seems to elude him. Chris has also given many reasons for opposing Trump. Well, that didn't really seem to make much of an impact then, did it? 2016 election results. On the 9th of November 2016, Chris reacted to news of Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton by throwing a huge temper tantrum. During that time, he asked someone to kill Trump with a sniper rifle, make videos and Facebook posts depicting the presidential-elect and later the vice president-elect being murdered in effigy using Transformers and Legos, and posted to the comment section of an LGBT Facebook page and asked its readers to pray for Trump's death. He also signed an online petition asking the Electoral College to disregard the results of the 2016 election and install Clinton into the presidency, which, of course, did not happen. Why would the House of Delegates and why would everybody throw out all the rules and actually have somebody to become president who specifically lost in the elections? Did Chris didn't think about that. I'll tell you what, it's like when 5 people apply for one job and 1 person gets it. And then somebody out of the 4 others wants to, take this to a tribunal saying, well, what about, why did you not want me involved in it? Well, it's very simple. Do you think an organization is going to give somebody a job specifically that they didn't want, or rather because they wanted somebody else? open letter to permit. Chris has also refused to recognize Permert as his president, saying Trump is not president, mayor, or anything in Quickville. Good, because Quickville is not a real place. Open letter to Permert on the LGBT. Upon reading that Permert had said he would sign the First Amendment Defense Act if passed by Congress, a bill opposed by liberals due to potential enabling discrimination against the LGBT community, Chris first reacted by making a death threat, then writing an open letter directed to Permert. Hey, Donald Trump, I have a puzzler for you. In the alternative reality/dimension/universe where A, every person there is the opposite born gender from here, in an example, the Donald Trump there is a woman, and every president of the United States of America there has been female, and B, the LGBTQ is the norm and the discrimination happens against the straight people, would you, the Donald Trump of this reality dimension/universe, allow the Donald Trump in that opposite reality/dimension/universe sign the anti-straight law that would allow discrimination of yourself ever? Well, here's the reason why this would never work. I'm going to absolutely say this is because, well, if there was no straight people, how do they hope, this little thing called breeding and childbearing, how does Chris imagine that any of that is going to work if, a man and a woman wouldn't come together to produce offspring? How does Chris imagine that, children are going to be born? That we are not going to go into Brave New World territory, Chris, because guess what? Nobody, and I mean nobody, is ever going to bring that into reality. The only way, well, then again, I don't know exactly what the population is going to be in 10 years' time. Japan, I know, has had an issue regarding its population for years, and whether or not this is something that spreads to the rest of the world is currently uncertain. But this is just straight up ridiculous, because why on earth would But Chris is just asking a question that has no bearing, and, well, Chris, they're not... What Chris doesn't seem to understand is that they're not saying, being gay is going to be rendered illegal, because guess what? Chris can... Because I've heard there are even some transgender activists who are actually taking the fight to Trump at this moment regarding discrimination. So, it's the fact that, well, Chris, if you genuinely feel that you are, under the cosh, or whether or not you actually have your rights brought into question, then absolutely take it to Donald Trump. Take it to Congress. Take it to your governor of state. Do that, Chris. And then see what happens. Unless, of course, you don't feel threatened or intimidated, which, again, considering Chris has also made threats issuing for the death of Donald Trump, then presidential-elect, your guess is as good as mine as to what exactly Chris truly feels, or how well do you think this is going to go down. If your answer is no, then it should be fit that you do not discriminate against us, the LGBTQ, as the people there discriminate against the straight. Yet, if your answer remains yes, then you, sir, would end up being a self-loathing person, as you allow the continuing of discrimination of yourself in that reality/dimension/universe, that is, the very same planet, and the very same United States of America that you yourself, regardless, dare to reside and take office in. Donald Trump, abdicate the office and let Hillary Clinton run the country. For the love of religion, for any shred of self-love you have for yourself, or die from yours or someone else's hand. Good day. Though confusing, Chris's point seems to be that he wants Permert to consider the perspective of an LGBT-oriented person before making his decision on the bill. Aside from the death threat at the end, it is a fair effort by Chris, whose own autism makes it difficult for him to empathize with other people. In any case, said bill was never passed or signed by Permert. 2020. Right on. I say no to Drum Fantastic Infinity Squared. Chris giving support to Biden/Harris campaign in response to Jason Alexander's endorsement. By the time he encountered the Idea Guys, Chris had shifted his focus from being invested in following LGBT plus groups to being invested in his imaginary world. Without the influence from LGBT groups, Chris seemed to have left his hatred of Trump and his interest in politics behind, preferring to occupy himself with his polyamorous marriages and alternative dimensions. Nonetheless, Chris vocalized his support for Andrew Yang in October of 2019, during the lead-up to the Democratic Party primates to select a nominee for president. This was most likely due to Yang's support of universal basic income, which Chris probably hoped would upgrade his monthly tugboat significantly. Conversely, he practically ignored any and all news concerning Trump's impeachment in December of 2019, and the months that followed, which demonstrated Chris's comparative lack of interest in politics at this point in time. After all, the impeachment process would have been the earliest point that he could have been removed from office besides January of 2021, presuming that he lost his 2020 re-election bid, which he eventually did. And I remember where it was like 20 past 4 in the afternoon in December when I saw that, well, Trump had basically lost. I can tell you pretty much the exact moment of when it happened. I think it was a Saturday, the more I think about it. Anyway, however, Chris did become slightly more engaged with politics much closer to the 2020 election, starting around the time that news that Donald Trump contracted COVID-19 got out. Taken to social media during October 2020, he replied to Ben Saint to dispel his claims that Chris was responsible for Trump's ailment via a curse. Chris also took a moment to proclaim that COVID-19 would not be the cause of Trump's demise, but that this end will come by any other means, as his death is foretold as part of Chris's own dimensional merge prophecies. He then vocalized support for Democratic presidential and vice presidential candidates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris a few days later, after their respective debates against Donald Trump and Mike Pence, ensuring that they received the critical solitude vote in the election. Chris also appreciated the Schadenfreude of someone reportedly hacking into Trump's Twitter account after it was reported to have very minimal security protection. True to Chris's prophecy, Trump recovered from his infection. The actual election arrived on the 3rd of November. Actually, yeah, that's probably when it was. Despite Chris's opposition to Trump and the uncertainty of the election, he tweeted that he would vote for Lisa Simpson, likely due to his belief that she would lead the nation after the merge. Provisional results indicate that Chris may be one of only 2 write-in voters in Ruckersville. Regardless of whether or not Chris really wasted his vote on Lisa Simpson, Biden then won Virginia later that night by nearly 10 points and eventually won enough states for both an electoral college and popular vote victory over Trump. Chris eventually watched a Saturday Night Live segment that he later tweeted about, expressing jubilation that Trump would not get a second term. Amid a recent attempt to retreat into his fantasy world, Chris did not comment on the outcome of the runoff for Senate races in Georgia, which gave Biden a bare majority in the Senate. The storming of the U.S. Capitol on the following day, or Trump's second impeachment on charges of incitement to insurrection as a result of the storming. However, Chris did comment on Trump's ban from Twitter, which also occurred as a result of the storming. 2024. At the 2024 Libertarian National Convention, two write-in votes were cast for Christian Weston Chandler on the first ballot of the party's presidential nomination process. Chris himself had no apparent affiliation with or knowledge of the votes. Chris supported Kamala Harris in this presidential election. He created a hand-drawn sign in support of her and displayed it at 14 Branch Lane Court, his former residency. When Chris livestreamed his reaction to the presidential debate between Harris and Trump, he called himself a moderate. Among other things, it would seem. Chris as apolitical. Some Christorians are of the opinion that Chris is essentially apolitical, and doesn't have the maturity or outward perspective needed to truly grasp political issues. This is evidence from Chris voting for Obama in 2008 and 2012 because he personally related to him, and Chris voting for Hillary in 2016 because she is a woman. In 2020, when most progressiveness was focused on ousting Trump, Chris wrote in Lisa Simpson. This all combined indicates that haunches and fantasies shape Chris's voting patterns so much than actual policies or candidates. Chris has, on occasions, fleetingly expressed political opinions. For example, he said Hillary would be a good president because she supported immigration, and said in 2010 that taxes should be lowered. If we take Chris as apolitical, these statements should be taken to reflect peer influence from the LGBT community and Bob respectively, i.e., Chris is fleetingly parroting political opinions rather than actually considering their content. When pressed for his opinion on abortion, Chris has at times said it's a personal choice, suggested, though not explicitly stated, it should only be legal in cases of rape or incest, or just failed to respond entirely. It is not necessarily a contradiction to say that Chris is political in the sense of being engaged with the political process, but apolitical in the sense of being disengaged with political discourse. In political science, Chris could be referred to as a low information voter, aka how much it actually takes to it's not necessarily the same thing as like a swing based vote, I suppose, but more in the case of, well, Chris sort of also tries to vote in the sense of being on the side of right. However, what is right and what is wrong in Chris's viewpoint is something that would be worth discussing if Chris was actually ever willing to sit down and talk about it. But, I guess not. So, with all that being said and done, that is the whole of Chris and the Society articles done. And once again, just to give you an idea about sort of us closing in on what we actually have left to talk about. And by the way, these are just all of the videos talk about Chris and politics, by the way. Maybe we will actually have to sort of like talk about maybe all of these, perhaps, but to be honest, Jesus Christ Chan reacted to... just look at how far we've come, eh? But basically, he is just everything we have left to do. Expression and technology. That is honestly all we actually have left to go on. And to be honest, even though we're sort of marching towards the end of April, I do feel a little bit sad that all of this is coming to an end anyway. But there is always another year, eh, guys? But with all that being said and done, I hope each and every one of you have enjoyed this article on Chris and politics. And, well, whatever your political stances may be, well, stand by them, whatever they may be. It's just about the only way things will ever get done. But, well, that's just all I've got to say about it. Do what you believe is the right thing to do, I guess is the way to put it. And I'll see all of you guys again in the next video. So take care, and bye-bye for now. Well, hello again. And just before each and every one of you leave, if I could just hold your attention for a few more seconds, and I want to show you very quickly my Patreon store. I've been running this for 5 years now, and ever since this month began, I've decided to reopen, relaunch, completely sort out my categories for videos, and I've uploaded them sometimes as far as 3 months in advance. So you guys will be able to get an exclusive look exactly what's coming out, when it's coming out, at your convenience. So make sure to stop by, take a look around, and let's see what you think. Thank you very much for supporting me once again, and I'll see you again next time.